This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
All right, we're now going to look at chapter 9 in the free lecture notes for paper P1. And as you can see, chapter 9 is about budgeting. Now, there's a lot of written here. It's not that much by way of arithmetic. And I will go through it. I'm not going to read every word, as always. And I'll try my best not to send you to sleep. But it is an integral part of the exam, of the syllabus, because it is the core of so many things. You know, for variance analysis, it relies on our budgeted costs and so on. So let's run through the notes with me. And you'll see, you can read the introduction yourself, but you can see in section 2, there's a list there of budgeted, what the objectives are of budgeting. Why do people prepare budgets in the first place? For some companies, it's because we always have, you know, it doesn't mean much. But there's a lot can be gained from the budget process, and the standard benefits of budgeting, the standard objectives, are, I'm not going to write them all down. I don't know what I did that line for. But one is just planning. We need the word budget means plan. We've got to do plans for the future, usually for the coming year, even though that's not a rule. But you know, as part of your budget, if you're a company producing desks, we are going to need to buy wood. Well, we need to budget. We need to plan how much wood are we going to need to buy. You know, 1,000 square meters a month or whatever. It's a series of plans. How many staff are we going to need? We need to plan ahead. So, you know, if we need more, we can recruit. If we need less, we can lose some. Communication. Communication in two senses of the word, to be honest. Because of this series of plans I just mentioned, we'll plan how many staff we need next year. Well, when the human resources people get that budget that we need, 500 employees, it's communicating to them what we want them to achieve. We need them to make sure we've got 500 employees. But more than that, communication. The budgets, when we give them to our managers, it communicates what the company is trying to achieve. You know, maybe this year we're trying desperately to improve quality in all aspects, have less wastage, have better products and so on. Well, that would be within the budgets. So it's a way of communicating to the managers, to the staff, what the company is overall trying to achieve. Coordination. That's in the sense that clearly, if I'm in charge of the budget process, I'll ask the managers, you know, what we can achieve. My production manager might tell me we're capable of producing 100,000 units a year. But there's not much point in him producing 100,000 units a year if the sales manager tells me we can only sell 80,000. You know, it's got to coordinate. We've got to make sure that we're producing what we think we can sell. And if we know how many we intend to produce, we need to coordinate and make sure we've got the right number of staff and we're buying the right amount of material and so on. Motivation, another common use of budgets. We give I'll use human resources again. We tell them we need 500 staff and we budget how much we intend to pay. Well, we hope that the relevant manager is budgeted to do better. You know, if we're budgeting to pay $5 an hour, we want to motivate them to try and spend less. And standardly, we might have some sort of reward scheme that they might get a bonus if they do better than budget. They might not get a bonus if they do worse. Authorization and delegation. Again, suppose I'm in charge of budgets, and sorry, keep using human resources, but still. We've sorted out the budgets, coordinated, and we think we need 500 employees next year, which may mean recruiting more people. Well, once the budget is approved and given to human resources, they're then authorised to recruit 500, or to make sure we've got 500, to recruit the necessary extra people. They don't need to come back to me for permission. They only need to come back to me if for some reason they decide, oh, we need 600 people, which is more than the budget. Delegation, well, it then becomes their responsibility to make sure we've got the 500 employees. Control, well, this relates very much obviously to the previous chapters on variances. The budget gives us something to compare with. Now, if we budgeted that we'll spend 20,000 on materials next month, then subject to that flexing we have to do. If we spend more, we want to know why. It's a way of trying to control that we're not overspending unnecessarily. And finally, evaluation of performance. Again, we can compare what managers actually spend with what we budget they should spend, and measure how well they're doing. Are they doing better than we were budgeting? Are they doing worse? So as I said, I'm probably talking too much already, but these are important. So make sure you are happy with these standard objectives, and of course, not just learn the words that you know what we're talking about. Exercise 1. Now, it's a pity you can't talk to me because I've asked you to give me an answer rather than me give you one. Consider budgets you may have experienced in your workplace or elsewhere. How successful were they at fulfilling the objectives above? Well, I can't answer that for you, obviously. But spend some time. I'm not saying sit there for a week, but have a think. To the extent you were involved in them or you've seen them, think about each of those. Did they achieve those objectives? A says, suggest how a budget might be used as a motivational tool. Well, I said as one of those objectives, the budget is giving our managers targets. We've budgeted we need 1,000 square meters of wood a month, and that we should be paying $5,000 for them. Well, that's a target for the manager. And we want it to be motivating. We want the manager to want to try and beat the budget. Maybe we are offering bonuses if they do better. But even if we aren't, we want them to be motivated. They know what they're aiming for. A matter of pride, they want to do better. But we do have to be careful. We want the budget to be challenging on the manager, but we don't want it to be impossible. It'd be ridiculous if you told your purchasing manager, right, we should be spending $5,000 a month on the wood, and the purchasing manager knows from the start that's completely impossible. Can't possibly get it that cheaply. Well, they give up trying. They know they can't get any bonuses anyway. They just give up trying, and they don't care anymore. So you have to be very careful that the budget, the targets are realistic, but at the same time, they are challenging people. But they are therefore motivated. B says, to what extent, it's spelled wrongly, but to what extent does the budget enable the communication of objectives and future plans to others? Well, I hinted at that as we were going through that list. Maybe this year we do desperately want to improve quality. We have lots of complaints and things. And so there'll be bits in the budget. If customers are complaining, perhaps we need more checks before goods leave the building. And in the budget, there'll be more checks. And staff the relevant employees will realise what we're trying to achieve. It communicates where the company's trying to go. Over the page, a bit of terminology here, but it says principal budget factor. When we're doing budgets, where are we going to start? You know, if I'm a company manufacturing desks, although ultimately we might end up with a budgeted profit statement, we have to do it in stages. I'll need to have a budget for how much wood I'm going to buy, how much labour I'm going to need, and so on. But we do need a starting point. Now, usually, or perhaps most obviously, the first thing you'd look at, you'd budget sales. You'd say, well, how many units do we think we can sell? 10,000. Fine. How many will we produce? Perhaps we don't want inventories. We'll produce 10,000. Fine. 10,000. How much wood do we need? And so on. But there has to be somewhere to start. You can't just, oh, let's budget how much wood we're going to use when you haven't even budgeted how many you're going to produce. Well, the principal budget factor is the first thing to be budgeted. And as I've said, it's usually going to be the sales. We need to know how many we expect to sell, to know how many we need to produce, and so on. But not always. Strictly, it's whatever limits the level of activity. Now, what I mean by that, I've said it's usually going to be sales because it's usually the sales that stop us being any bigger. We might be able to produce millions, but if we can only sell 10,000, that's limited us. But it could be that we could sell thousands and thousands and thousands, but there's a limit to how much wood we can buy to make the desks. And so if the amount of wood available was limited, and if I could only make 10,000 desks, then the fact that customers might be prepared to buy 50,000 desks is irrelevant. If I can only make 10,000, we can only sell 10,000. It's whatever limits us. So it could be that the materials are limited, therefore we can only make so many desks, therefore we're going to sell so many desks, and so on. It could be that the amount of labour available is limited. Well, the first thing we need to do is decide what is the limiting factor. Maybe it is sales, but maybe it's wood, and so on. We'll budget that first, and then we can carry on and do all our other budgets. You'll see a little flow chart there. It's not a question of learning, I don't think. But it says the preparation of budgets. Here is assuming that sales are our principal budget factor. That's what limits us. But you do things in steps. You have a whole series of little budgets. We'll budget for our sales first of all. How many do we expect we're going to sell? Then, once we know that, we can prepare a production budget. How many units do we think we're going to produce? So, no dollars there. You know, a budget will produce 10,000 units a month. Once we know how many we're going to produce, we can do budgets for our materials, for our labour, for our overheads. And in fact, there'll be in two forms. Raw materials, for instance, you see, you might budget will produce 10,000 units. You'll say, each unit should take 5 kilos. Right, well, budget on buying 50,000 kilos of material, square metres, whatever. And then you'll cost it out. And budget how much you actually expect to spend. When we've done all those budgets, we can put them together and get a cost of sales budget. We can bring in other expenses, you see, less and distribution, general admin. Then, putting it all together, we can produce a budget profit statement. And these aren't rules, it's up to companies individually what they produce, but usually they'll do a cash budget as well, budgeting how much cash they expect to come in and out, perhaps each month. And while they're doing that, they will need a capital expenditure budget. Are they budgeting on buying any new machines and so on? There'll usually be a budget for that, and that clearly will influence how much cash is spending. And finally, although it doesn't have to be there, again, there's no laws telling you what budgets you have to produce, but they'll normally produce a budgeted balance sheet, a statement of financial position. All right, well, I've done enough talk for the moment, so although there's more to come, let's have a little exercise. Exercise 2. Have a quick read with me. The XYZ company produces 3 products, X, Y, and Z, for the coming accounting period. Budgets are to be prepared using the following information. We're told the budgeted sales are, we're told the standard usage of raw material. For each of the 3 products, we are using wood and we're using varnish. We're told the inventories. Obviously, we'll know the opening inventory for the period, but also we're budgeting on closing inventories, and we know the inventories of raw materials. And finally, we're given the standard hours for each unit, and labour is paid at the rate of $3. Now we're asked for a whole series of budgets here. I don't know, I'll do some. You can have got some yourself, it won't take long. But it's to illustrate how one thing leads to another. How you've lots of individual small budgets which ultimately, not to do it here, but ultimately we put together to produce a budget income statement. But let's have a go. They've told us our budget sales, so they presumably are the principal budget factor, and they'll dictate the production. Anyway, it says he wants a sales budget, and he wants quantity and value. Budgets aren't always in dollars. We need to know how many units we're budgeting on, and then we can cost it out. Well, this is easy because they've actually given it to us. But in units, X, Y, and Z, this is sales. It's 2,000 X, 4,000 Y, 3,000 Z. It wants to know the budgeted revenue, same dollars. Well, X is at 100, so 200,000. Y, 130, so 520,000. Z, 150, so 450,000. And I think what would be useful, of course, ultimately, if we were doing an income statement, not only do we need to know how many units of each we want to sell, what revenue we want, but the total revenue we're budgeting on is 1.17 million. So that was an easy one. However, now we've done our sales budget, we can now go to the next step and do our production budget. Appreciate we can't budget on how many we're going to produce until we know how many we're going to sell. We know how many we're going to sell. Well, why aren't we going to budget on producing exactly the same numbers? It's because in the middle of the question you've got inventories mentioned. We've already got some units in inventory, and we're budgeting, I think in all 3 cases, yeah, we're budgeting on increasing the inventory. And so let's do it, X, Y, Z. We know what we're selling, 2,000, 4,000, 3,000. If we didn't intend to change inventories, then we'd produce the same as we'd sell. But here, in all cases, I am right, yes, we intend to increase our inventory. So surely, if you intend to sell 2,000 and you want to increase your inventory by 100, well, to be able to sell 2,000 and increase inventory, we'll actually need to produce 2,100 units. And similarly for Y and Z, Y we want to increase by 200 units, so we'll produce 4,200 in total. Z, again 100 units, so we'll produce 3,100 in total. And of course, although we need that budget, the production manager needs to know how many he's supposed to be producing. That one isn't in dollars, it'd be meaningless. He needs a budget in units. You know, there's his schedule of work for the period. Again, one leads to another, because now we know how many we produce, we can start deciding how much material we actually need. We can only do that when we know what the production's going to be. And the materials, we've two materials, you can see the second little table in the question. Each product is using wood, and also it's using varnish. And so we need a budget for how much wood we're going to need and how much varnish we're going to need. I'll do them side by side, wood, varnish. How much are we going to need? Well, product X, we're producing 2,100 units. Each one needs 5 kilos of wood. And so, for wood, we'll need a total of 10,500 kilos. Varnish, may as well do at the same time, it needs 2 litres. So 2,100 units at 2 litres, we need 4,200 litres of varnish. Similarly for the others, product Y, we're producing 4,200. They need 3 kilos of wood, which is 12,600. They need 2 litres of varnish, 4,200 units, 2 litres is 8,400. And finally Z, production of 3,100, 2 kilos of wood, and 1 kilo of varnish. Well, although we need those workings, in fact, they are only workings because whoever's responsible for getting wood for us doesn't really need to know where it's being used. They need to know the total. So what we really need is how much wood do we need in total? 29,300 kilos of wood. Is that right? 11,100. Yes. And varnish. In total, we'll need 12, 15, 16, 2, 6, 7, 4, 12, 15,700 litres. The question is C note. He just wants quantities, fine. For what are going to be very obvious reasons in a moment. But we now know the amount of wood and varnish that we'll need. What we'll also need to know, though, surely for the purchasing manager, is how much we're going to need to buy. And so whereas C, I haven't written, but was the materials usage budget, D wants the purchases budget. And of course, why won't we automatically buy the amount we're going to use? It's because, again, there are inventories. We've currently got inventories of wood and varnish. And it hasn't said, but it should say wood is in kilos, varnish is in litres. We know the opening inventory. We're budgeting on those figures of closing inventory. And therefore, we need to adjust our usage to find out our purchases. So again, wood and varnish. The amount we need for production, we've just worked out. Just by the inventory, make sure you adjust the right way. May not be hard, but it's when you're rushing, it's easy to do silly things. We need 29,300 for our production, We've already got some in inventory, and we're going to reduce inventory, decrease in inventory. So for wood, inventory is going to fall by 3,000. So for our production, we're going to take 3,000 kilos from inventory, and therefore we're only going to need to buy the remainder this year at 26,300. And similarly for varnish, we want to use 15,700, but again we are reducing inventory, so 1,000 will come out of our inventory. We'll only need to buy the remaining 14,700 litres. So again, one thing leads to another. We couldn't do that until we knew the usage budget. We couldn't do the usage budget till we knew the production budget. You know, they have to be done in order. Here, because we are actually going to buy them, it wants to know the quantities and the value. Well, that's easy. The standard cost of wood is $8 and of varnish is $4. And so the actual expenditure we expect on wood $210,400. On varnish, 58,800. Good. One left. E. Labour. We're told about the standard hours per unit. We know how many units we're producing, and so we can work out how many hours of labour we actually need. And since we've got the rate per hour, we can also work out how much we expect to spend. So last bit, let me do it in hours first of all. X, Y, Z. How many are we producing? 2, 100, 4 200, 3 100. Let's see if I can remember that. 2 100, 3 100, 4 200. The hours per unit for X is 4, for Y is 6, for Z is 8. And so the total, 8 400, 25 200, 24 800. In hours, we're going to need 4, 9, 34, 58,400 hours, I think. 4, 6, 4, 1, 9. Yep. And finally, the value as well, we want it in dollars. So at $3 per hour, 175,200. Oh, somebody's checking me. Man, you've got the answers at the back of the notes anyway. But there's another one, you see, where it's not simply always in dollars. The budgets are plans. We need it in hours so that human resources or whoever's responsible knows how much labour we need to get. And of course, we also want it in dollars, so we know what rate we should be paying. And also, ultimately, once everything's costed, we could then put it all together and produce an income statement. And incidentally, these little individual budgets or plans, which go to the relevant managers, you know, production manager gets the production budget, sales manager gets the sales budget, and so on. These individual plans we call functional budgets. And when they're all prepared, then we can put everything together and get the budget income statement, budget statement of financial position, balance sheet, and complete the whole package. All right, we'll have a breather there. Unfortunately, we're not finished. There's several more pages. But we'll have a break there, and then I'll carry on with a bit more.